We visited Banff and Jasper National Parks in Alberta, Canada from July 18th through the 31st. From Parker, our trip took us north to Worland, Wyoming, Shelby, Montana, then on to Calgary in a visit to Banff, then to Golden in British Columbia, Valemount in British Columbia, and then back down to Omak, Washington, and finally to Hood River, where we stayed for 4 days before going to Baker City, Brigham City, Utah, and then continuing on home to Parker. On July 18th, we drove north from Parker using I-25 to take us to the Wyoming border. We continued north into Wyoming using I-25 again until we got to Casper, where we had lunch, and then transferred to US 20, which we took west and then north, seeing the Wind River Valley and the town of Thermopolis before ending the day at Worland, Wyoming. In Casper, we stopped for lunch at Crossroads Park, and here I am finishing my coffee as I admire the view of the North Platte River. We are in the Wind River Canyon in Wyoming, a little bit south of Thermopolis. This is the Wind River Canyon, which we'd seen before several years ago. It's very narrow, as you can see, and the cliffs are very high and very impressive looking all around. Well, we have exited the Wind River Canyon and we're still following along the Wind River. We have come now to Thermopolis, known for its hot springs. And here are the hot springs. On the morning of day 2, we continued north through Wyoming to the border of Montana and then worked our way further north, stopping for lunch at Harlowton, Montana. Then we headed somewhat west and stopped in Great Falls to see the Missouri River and continued to Shelby, Montana for the night. Our first excitement of the day came at Harlowton, Montana, where we stopped at Chief Joseph Park, and the swingers in the group had a pretty good time getting some exercise. We're in Great Falls, Montana, and the Missouri River runs through Great Falls. And this is just a view of the Missouri River, a little river island here, and some ducks. We began our third day by driving north from Shelby to the Canadian border. Once in Alberta, we drove further north to Lethbridge, where we saw an interesting bridge. Then we moved west and north to the outskirts of Calgary. From Calgary, we drove west to Banff, took in some of the views there, and then returned to Calgary for the night. The Visitor Center in Lethbridge welcomed us to the town and also took the opportunity to wish a happy 150th birthday to Canada. Adjacent to the Visitor Center is the Lethbridge High Arch Trestle Railway Bridge. At 300 feet high and a mile long, this is the longest bridge in North America of its type. The bridge spans the Oldman River, and here we see some of the Oldman River, but as we approach the bridge, the river gets buried in trees and you can't see it at all. We have now driven through the outskirts of Calgary and then on west to Banff, and we are now just outside of Banff where there are the Vermilion Lakes, a set of little lakes that have a sort of a reddish hue to them because of some algae that blooms in them. Here's another pan from a slightly different spot along these Vermilion Lakes. The haze that you see is due to smoke from fires that are burning in Canada off to the west of the park and have blown in here and are certainly keeping these mountain views from being very clear. And this, as seen from the Vermilion Lakes, is Rundle Mountain. Driving above Banff on Tunnel Mountain Drive, we stopped to see this rock formation called the Hoodoos. In downtown Banff, we walked across a bridge over the Bow River in order to get to the Banff National Park headquarters building. And this is that headquarters building. And from that headquarters building, we are now looking back across the bridge over the Bow River at downtown Banff, and the mountain behind it enshrouded in smoke. Behind the administrative building are the Cascade Gardens, and we're seeing them here. They were largely under reconstruction, and we were only able to see a small part. We then returned to Calgary for the night. On day 4, we left Calgary and drove west on Canada 1, a little bit past Banff, and then turned north on Highway Canada 1A, the old road to Lake Louise, and took that to Lake Louise, stopping to see Johnson Creek on the way. After seeing Lake Louise and nearby Moraine Lake, we headed west on Canada 1 out of the park to Golden in British Columbia, where we spent the night. Driving west from Calgary on Canada 1, we soon approached the Rocky Mountains of Canada and were able to pull off to the side and take a look at these peaks before we entered them in the park. Just outside of the park is the town of Canmore, where we stopped for this pan of the Front Range. You can see that the smoke from yesterday seems to have cleared out, but unfortunately has been replaced with some low clouds. Shortly after turning north on Canada 1A, we stopped at Johnson Creek, seen here, and took a hike up the creek to Lower Johnson Falls. Much of the trail to the falls was on a catwalk suspended over the creek. And here is Lower Johnson Falls. Going north on Highway 1A, we found the roadside just covered with these beautiful white daisies. Still continuing north on Highway 1A, we saw off to our east Castle Cliffs. We continued on a few miles to the end of Highway 1A and the famous Lake Louise. And here is Lake Louise in all of its pristine wonder. Well, there's a little more definition now on this mountain at the end of the lake. You can see the glacier. We hiked up the right-hand bank of the lake all the way to the end, and along the way we saw this stream. Some very pretty wildflowers grew along the bank as well. We have now reached the far end of the lake, and as you look up the lake, back the way we came, you see the Chateau Lake Louise. Also marking the far end of the lake is this virtually vertical cliff. We returned to the head of the lake, got a good view of the Fairmont Hotel, and a few parting memories of Lake Louise. Nearby is Moraine Lake, with its egress jammed with floating logs. Despite the low cloud cover, which certainly detracted from the beauty of these landmark lakes, Moraine Lake was very striking in its appearance. It also had this pile of geologic rubble at the end of the lake. The afternoon was moving along, so we headed west for Golden, British Columbia, in our motel. On day 5, we took Canada 1 back east into the park from Golden, went by Lake Louise, and then turned left on Highway 93 and took that north through the remainder of Banff National Park and then through the adjacent Jasper National Park until we got to the town of Jasper. There we turned west, headed out of the park, and going a bit south from that, found Valemont, where we spent the night. Our first stop of the day was at Herbert Lake, in which we saw the reflections of the Waputink Range on this cloudy morning. Along with the white daisies today, we have a number of these rather pretty red flowers. Down here we have Bow Lake, which I believe is where the Bow River finds its origin, and that's the one that runs through Banff and that we followed all day yesterday on the Bow River Parkway. And over here is Crowfoot Glacier. A little further along, we got a close-up view of Bow Lake. Next we climbed Bow Summit to get this look down at Peyto Lake. Another beautiful blue lake. I assume that's feet and not meters, even though we're in Canada. That wall is just about straight up and down. At Parker Ridge, we pulled off the road to look back at where we'd come and the Mistaya River running next to the highway. Looking the other way from Parker Ridge, we saw Nixon Creek tumbling down the mountainside. As we pulled away from the turnout at Parker Ridge, we saw these two mountain goats making the best of a cloudy day. From the ice field center, there was a view of three glaciers: Snow Dome, Andromeda, and Athabasca. Athabasca, Andromeda, and Snow Dome. A little further along the way, we saw Tangle Creek Falls. This is the Upper Sunwapta Falls. Here it spills into the canyon below the falls. And a bit further along, this is Athabasca Falls. And this is the canyon below the falls. We then hiked into Horseshoe Lake, where some of the local youth were having a very good time. Ooh. We're at the end of the line here, getting out, and this is a pass and it has sweeping views of a lot of these mountains, but unfortunately the mountains are all pretty well covered with clouds, so you really don't get the impact. We then continued a few miles north to Jasper, then west and south to Valemount for the night. The next day we drove south through British Columbia, avoiding the fires that were raging on the plains, and made our way into Washington, where we went to a few miles further to Omak for the night. On day 7 of the trip, we continued south through Washington, making 2 stops before crossing the Columbia River into Oregon and then heading west to Hood River, where we were to spend 4 days with our kids and grandchildren. Our first stop of the day was in Kashmir, close to Leavenworth, where we spent our family reunion last year, and there we visited a candy store and watched them make and package candy. Our second stop of the day was in the 19th century mining town of Liberty, Washington, but this is not really a ghost town, and almost every one of the houses in town are still inhabited. The most interesting thing in the town was a horizontal undershot arastra, a circular device used for crushing gold ore. This is an undershot arastra, and it's being powered by water coming in and turning it, and then it inside is dragging that stone which would grind the gold ore that would be placed in this center thing. And it's simply powered by the water turning this big wheel. And the water is here. Also of interest in the town was this grizzly bear carved from a tree trunk. Hood River offered us 4 days of respite from our trip. On the second of those 4 days, we went a few miles east to Mosier, Oregon, and took a hike. The hike followed the old highway, now abandoned in favor of I-84, but nicely maintained for use as a hiking trail. On the south side of the trail, we see a lava field and a pretty good wall of lava. The hike offered pretty views down of the Columbia River and its gorge and islands. It offered a tunnel. It offered some interesting geological formations. It offered riverboats. It provided views of some very pretty wildflowers. And it even showed us a red-necklaced snake. The next day we took a very pretty 35-mile loop drive south of Hood River down to Parkdale and back through an agricultural area, and the drive is known as the Fruit Loop. Early in the drive we got this rather stunning view of Mount Hood. Next we visited an area known as the Lavender Valley, for obvious reasons. The Lavender Valley provided its own views of Mount Hood. As well as a pretty rural scene. As we left, we looked north and saw Mount Adams in the distance. We then stopped to visit an alpaca farm. The alpacas were also available to be fed.
I didn't know they lived that long. Hi. Oh, you're so cute. I just want to pet your fuzzy little head. I want to go to see your pet. You're so cute, right? Well, excuse me. No, you're being kitty. Here we go, Em. There you go.
The owner of the associated shop demonstrated spinning alpaca yarn.
Then I will fill another bobbin up and I will put each one down here on a lazy tape, spin the wheel the opposite direction and ply the two together. So I'll take a string from each one, thread it onto an empty bobbin. You could do that. And that's how you get a two-plied yarn.
Okay. She makes that look really easy.
Doesn't she?
Yeah. How long did it take you to learn how to do that?
Let's see, I think I've been doing this for like 3 years now, roughly. My mother-in-law taught me how, and the owners were gracious enough once they learned, they're like, hey, you can demonstrate. So I'm like, okay. So I got my practice in.
2 days later, on July 29th, day 12 of our trip, we left for home. We followed I-84 east and then south to Baker City, where we spent the night. Just short of Baker City, we stopped at the Oregon Trail Interpretive Center, where we saw this replica of circled covered wagons. Baker City is an old mining town, and its downtown is filled with interesting old buildings. This is the Carnegie Library, built in 1909. And this is the Mint Building, built in 1889. And this is the Geyser Grand Building, built in 1889 for the price of $65,000. Here it is from the front corner. You can see the balcony up there on top of the clock tower. Quite a building. And this is the saloon in the corner of the Grand Hotel. This is the Ibsen House, built by a banker in 1887. This is the Bowen House, built in 1895. Well, we saw the Bowen House. This is the Bowen Building, built in 1886. And then in 1889, the Bamberger Building next door and similar architecture was also built. This is the Baer Home, B-A-E-R, built in 1882. This is the St. Francis Cathedral, completed in 1908, started in 1905, and it's built out of the same volcanic tuff that many of the other buildings in town were built from. And here is a view from the back and the side of the church. On day 13 of our trip, we followed I-84 south to the Idaho border and then stayed on 84 through Idaho until we were past Burley. At that point, we dropped down south to the City of Rocks National Reserve and viewed that area before returning to I-84 and continuing on into Utah, where we stayed for the night at Brigham City. The City of Rocks National Reserve consists of a series of granite protrusions, which are quite impressive to look at. This is the Circle Creek overlook near the entrance to the park. This is what's left of the Circle Creek Ranch that was built here. And the lintel tells you that it was built in March 29th, 1922. It was completed. The granite we see in the foreground is about 28 million years old, but the other granite that we see here in this valley that's on the higher mountains is 2 to 3 billion years old and is among the oldest exposed rock in the North American continent. This interesting formation is known as Chicken Rock. And as we look across the street, we'll see another rock that's known as Camp Rock. Camp Rock bears the messages written in axle grease that were left by many of the pioneers as they came through and camped near Camp Rock. This rock formation is called Kaiser's Helmet. This is called Devil's Bedstead. This is Immigrant Pass is up here, which is where the pioneers crossed over this mountain range that we're in. And these two rocks over here are called Twin Sisters. And this little rock over here is quite a pinnacle. And these are the Twin Sisters, 638 feet high. A major landmark on the trail. This formation is known as bread loaves because of its resemblance to a loaf of sliced bread. Here are another few impressive looking scenes. This is called Window Arch. And this is Window Arch from the other side, with a beautiful picture in it. And this is the area around Window Arch. Our last stop in the park was Elephant Rock, a destination for technical rock climbers. We then went on back to I-84 and down to Brigham City for the night. On the last day of our trip, we took I-84 east to I-80 and then followed that through Wyoming all the way to I-25, which we took home south to Parker, thus ending our 14-day trip to Banff and Hood River.